Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Harwood Half Hour. I'm Rich Harwood, your host. Glad to have you with us. Why don't you flip me a message to make sure you can hear me and see me. I'm coming to you today from Toronto, Canada. And today's topic is how as change makers do we get past our fears? And so through this Harwood Half Hour, I'll be talking about some of the fears that we face and offering you 4 steps you can take, 4 practical steps you can take to get past your fears. I just want to mention about the topic is next week. Next week, I'll be talking about a personal covenant. How is it that you strike a deal with yourself about how you're going to step into the world? It's a great follow-up to this episode this week about getting past your fears. We'll walk through a personal covenant. You'll be able to fill it yourself, and it'll be kind of like a holiday gift for you, so you can start off the new year on the right foot with a clear stake in the ground about what really matters to you. Right after the holidays, after New Year's, I'll be doing another Harwood Half Hour episode. This one on reflection on a trip I'll be taking over the holidays to Israel, and where I'll be talking to a dozen or more organizations and leaders about how they're trying to create a shared society in Israel, and I'll be talking about what I learned and how we might be able to apply some of those lessons to our work here in North America and elsewhere. So, but today is about getting past your fears, something that we all struggle with, that we all wrestle with, and here's my question for you just to get started. What fears pop up for you when you're trying to create change in your community and organization? What kind of fears pop up for you when you're trying to create change in your community or organization? So if you can send me a quick message about that, that'd be great. And in the meantime, let me just start talking about this. Let me start with a story from here in Toronto, where I'm speaking to you from. I'm at the United Way of Greater Toronto, which, as some of you may know, is the largest local United Way in the entire world. It's known for being incredibly innovative and forward-thinking, and being really impactful in its work. Yet, as this region of the Greater Toronto Area continues to change and evolve, and as the issues that this way is trying to deal with, which is fighting poverty in all of its forms, they've been wrestling with a fundamental question that the Institute is helping them think about, which is, how do we be fiercely local to all the communities, the different communities here in the Greater Toronto region, which is a huge region? How do we be fiercely local and create systemic change at the same time? And as this organization, as the senior team in this organization, their stakeholders and others have been wrestling with this topic, you can imagine the fear that it's generating. They're wrestling here with what does it mean for us to work locally in different ways with our partners and with different groups, and how do we do that? And it's causing them to face all sorts of questions about how do we make sure that we're learning from all these different local endeavors so that it can roll up for systemic change, and who do we even need to bring together in the Greater Toronto Area, in the province of Ontario, in the country of Canada, to create the kind of systemic change that's required today in fighting poverty. And so as effective as this organization is, as strong as its culture is, as good as the senior leadership is, and it's really fantastic, it's creating a whole lot of change in people's lives about how they're going to work locally and then how they're going to create this systemic change. And so as I've been working with them on this, with one of my colleagues, Susan Taylor Simpson, we're experiencing all sorts of fears, the kinds of fears that I think many of us experience when we're creating change. I know they're the types of fears that I experience in doing this work myself. There's fears, I think, for all of us about wanting to be perfect, about how do we create change and maintain some sense of perfection. When you think about it, that's a really hard fear to deal with, because in creating change, we know that there's going to be imperfection. We know that there might even be failures. There will be failures that we're going to experience. Yet we get paralyzed by wanting to be perfect in everything that we do. There's a desire that in creating change that we want to meet everyone's needs. And we want to meet everyone's needs who are around the table. We want to meet everyone's needs in our communities. And as we change what we're doing, in the case of Toronto, or maybe in your community, or the work that the Harvard Institute is doing across the US or in Canada or Australia and elsewhere, how is it that we make choices about what we need to do, recognizing that we're just not going to be able to meet everyone's needs, especially as we start out in our work? And so there's the fear of moving forward, and sometimes we become paralyzed again in those efforts. There's the sense that I want to be all things to all people, right? The fear that I need to be all things to all people. And if I'm not all things to all people, then maybe not everyone's going to like me, that they maybe won't support our efforts. They won't come along and do the work with us. And so again, we become paralyzed, we worry, we get anxiety, we sweat it out in a sense, and in our efforts. And then, when we're creating change and we're engaged in all of this work, there's the sense of that we're going to lose control, that we're not going to be able to maintain control, is another way to put it. And that as we move forward, things are going to get out of our control. So again, we clasp down on things, we clamp down on things, we try to get everyone moving in lockstep together, except and I know in creating change that's nearly impossible, if impossible. We can't control everything. We can't maintain control over everything. We can't clamp down on everything. We'll never be able to innovate, to co-create things, to learn together, to make progress together, if we clamp down on everything and close everything down. So, but that fear often gets the best of us. It often gets the best of us. And then there's always this fear as you're starting to do this work in the back of your mind. I wonder if you've thought about this, about will I succeed? Will I be able to succeed at what I do? Will it work? And if it doesn't work, what will happen? And then you start thinking about, well, if it doesn't work, then maybe I should even begin it to begin with. And if I don't begin it to begin with, then how is it that we're going to create any kind of change? And so there are all these fears that sort of get a grip on us and create anxiety. They often create a sense of avoidance that, I don't want to deal with these issues, so I'm just going to avoid them. I won't talk about them. Sometimes they create frustration, even anger, because things are out of our control and we don't like that. And then in some of us, it creates a kind of obstinance, right? We block all types of change because if we can't control it, if it's not ours, if we don't know the outcome ahead of time, then we're not going to want to do it. And so that becomes a problem. So the question is, what do you do about this? How can we deal with these fears? How can we get past them? How can we be productive in the face of them? What I know is this, from doing this work for years now, we all have fears. We all experience it. It's part of the human condition. It's part of human nature. It's just simply part of being alive. It's part of being human. And we're never going to rid ourselves of fear, nor are we simply ever going to be able to reduce them to the point where we don't experience them. And so the question becomes, what do we do? How can we engage with them productively and not avoid them, not become obstinate in them, not become so anxious over them, not become so frustrated that we can't do anything? What can we do? So here are four things, four steps. They're kind of sequential that I'd urge you to think about when dealing with fear. And again, as I'm going through these, flip me a note if you can hear me. Flip me a note about whatever kind of fears that you might experience that you want to talk about, that you want maybe me to address as I go through this, and we'll go from there. But here we are, four key steps for how you get past your fears as a change maker. Number one, you have to name your fears. This may seem odd to say, may be a kind of a weird thing to raise, but here's the deal. If we don't name what we fear, then it just remains a kind of felt unknown within us, a kind of inkling that's gnawing at us. And those things, whether it's in psychology or in our lives or in working in communities as well, those things that go unnamed can't be addressed. We don't know what they are. We don't know how to talk about them. We don't know what to call them. And when we don't know what to call them, then we might start taking action on anything that seems plausible, but it actually may not even address what really is gnawing at us and what is bothering us. The other big thing about naming something is that I'm sure you've experienced this in your personal life. But as soon as you name something, as soon as you name it, you put a name to it, it means that you no longer have to fear it, because now it's out in the open. You're not hiding it. You're not trying to obscure it. You're not trying to run away from it. You're not trying to avoid it in some kind of way. It's right here. It's right in front of us. And when we name it, it immediately reduces anxiety. It's like, oh, now I see what it is. Now I understand what I'm really wrestling with. Now I even have something to call it. Now I can start to face it, maybe even. And so the first thing I'd say when you're experiencing fear as a change maker is to sit down, in a sense, close your eyes and think about, what is it that's really making me fearful? And what name can I give it so that I know what it is and I know what to call it? So that's number one. Number two, I'd say, is that we have to step forward. We have to step forward. You know, in the Bible, not to get religious on anyone here, there's no religious here, but in the Bible, my three favorite words are, here I am. And for some of you, as you know, it comes in part from the story of Moses standing before the burning bush, and God calls him out, and Moses says, who, me? Are you talking to me? Who am I to respond to you? And God says, no, I'm calling you, and I need you. And so Moses has to say, in a sense, oh, I hear you, and here I am. And in saying, here I am, in stepping forward, in a sense, we are saying, I am present. I am here. I hear what I need to do. I need to act on this fear called whatever I've named it. And I am making myself visible, in a sense. I am no longer hiding. I am no longer saying I'm not here. I'm no longer saying I don't know what to do, even though you still may not know exactly what to do. But you're saying, I'm here. I'm as ready as I can be at this moment. I'm going to make myself visible. I'm going to account for myself, in a sense, by saying I'm here. And this stepping forward is the first step of engagement, right? After naming something, it's the first positive step of stepping forward, literally, in your life and saying, I'm here, I'm present, I'm visible, I'm accounted for, I'm ready to try to deal with this, right? So number one is, if you've got these fears about creating change, which we all have, number one, name the fears. Number two, step forward. Number three, this is a hard one. Number three is you have to own it. You have to own the fear. And so in this way, I talk to folks a lot about this in terms of, you know, when we have something to do, when we fear something that we need to engage with, we often step back. We often shrink, from what we need to do. We often try to avoid this, right? And so in this case, when you own something, you need to do the exact opposite. You don't shrink, you don't avoid it, you actually lean into it. And so if you can picture in your mind for a moment, what does it feel like? Not what do you think about, but what does it feel like? What physical sensations do you get when you lean into something? What does it actually feel like for you when you lean into something? Now, I just want you to think about this in terms of any time in your life when you've leaned into something, when you've leaned into playing a sport, when you've leaned into an argument with someone, when you lean to something that you need to get done, when you have leaned into something that you fear, what does it feel like? This is a physical thing. This is something that's embodied within you. And the reason why I'm talking about that is because you want to remember in your mind right now, so that later on when you need to do this, you're not just going through a cognitive thing, a sort of a cerebral exercise, but there's a physical embodiment aspect to this about what it means to feel when you're leaning into something. So in this case, I want you to own it, and in owning it, you need to lean into it. You need to embrace it. You need to bring it closer to you, not push it farther away from you, right? And in bringing it closer to you, while that might make you afraid, it will also mean that you feel closer to it, and you might be able to begin to think about what you can do about it. And as you bring it closer to you, you neutralize some of the fear that you might have. Not all of it, not all of your anxiety, but you start to see that you don't have to be so afraid of it. You don't have to be so scared, right? So in owning it, I want you to lean into it. I want you to grab hold of it. I want you to embrace it. And in doing this, what you're doing in taking ownership is you're saying to yourself, I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to find a way to deal with this. I'm not going to avoid it. I'm not going to push it away. I'm not going to be fearful of it, right? So that's number 3. So first 3 things. How do you name something that you're afraid of? How do you step forward so that you can make yourself present and visible? How do you own it and lean into it and embrace it and grab hold of it? And then here's the 4th thing. How do you get moving? You need to get in motion. You need to, when I get fearful of stuff in my own life, about doing something, about giving a speech that I might have to give before a large crowd, or a crowd that I might think might not be receptive to my message, when I'm writing something that I'm fearful of writing, when I have to do something with people I work with that makes me fearful because I'm afraid I might hurt them, or I'm afraid they might reject me. I'm afraid I may not know the answer, or I'm afraid I might not know what to do. These things all, we all have these fears. They all come over us. I just like you, I experience them each and every day. There's a saying in my mind about getting in motion that I repeat as a mantra to myself. Sometimes I write it down and put it on my desk, and it's simply this: engage, engage, engage. Right? You have to engage. You have to get in motion. And what I find is, I need you to think about, in terms of getting over your fears, not how can you solve something, not how can you get rid of it. There are a lot of things that we face, like the folks in Toronto trying to figure out a new way to work with communities. There are lots of things that aren't solvable like that. They're not amenable to a single solution or simply a silver bullet or a one-time action. And so what's really important is figuring out, what can you peel off? Where can you start to engage? Where can you start to get into motion that will enable you to start moving forward, and that will start to reduce your fear of what's around you or what's in front of you or the person you need to engage with. And so when I have these fears, I literally sit in my office and I think about, okay, so who can I go talk to first that will allow me to do this? Or when I'm going to give a speech, I go around the conference room that might have 300, 500, 1,000 people in it. And I start introducing myself. I say, hey, I'm Rich Harwood. I'm your morning speaker. And in starting to shake people's hands, to get physical contact, to find people who are receptive to me being there, it immediately starts to reduce my fears. It immediately starts to reduce my blood pressure. I immediately start to remember why I'm there and that I can do this. And so what I'd say is when you have these fears, engage, not willy-nilly, not going off half-cocked, not doing as many activities as you possibly can. It's almost the reverse. It's thinking about, okay, so what's the one thing I can start to do that will enable me to start to be in motion so I can start to feel better about this? And here's the thing. Here's the kicker on this. Once you're in motion, as I said before, when I shake people's hands right before I'm about to give a speech, once you're in motion, then things start to rise. You start to find that actually you can engage. You start to find other people or other things that you can engage with that start to reduce your fear, that start to make you feel safer. Because that's what this is about. If you feel fear, if you're scared, you feel unsafe, right? There's a threat. And so as you start to engage, you can start to feel safer. You can start to reduce the threat. When you start to engage, when you start to get in motion, there's this kind of serendipity that occurs. And I once wrote a report called Planned Serendipity. And this is a kind of planned serendipity because as you engage, you're actually engaged in planned action. And that action creates a kind of serendipity, right? So it's kind of a planned serendipity. Another way to think about this is you're creating the conditions for more serendipity to arise, right? And so the more you engage, the more possibilities for serendipity, the more possibilities for serendipity, the more possibilities for you reducing your fear. And that becomes really important. The two other quick things as you begin to get in motion. As you begin to get in motion, you'll start to realize that there are people out there who want to be your allies, right? This is in essence what's happening to me when I'm shaking people's hands before a speech. I'm finding people in the audience who say, I love your work, or I'm really excited to be here. I want to hear what you have to say, or I'm really interested in X, or this is what I'm working on and struggling with. And so then when I'm up on the stage, I can look at them and I can see them and they're allies. They're with me. I can feel it, right? And this happens in working in communities. It happens in your organization. And so as you get into motion, you discover allies. They reveal themselves to you. And that becomes really important. And then lastly, as you get in motion, if you're engaging and you're finding some success, you gain confidence. And the more confidence you gain, the more your fears maybe not totally subside, but get in check. And then you can begin to do more of your work. So these are the things that I wanted to share with you today. We all have fears. It's part of being human. They're never going away. The question is, how do we deal with them? And how do we deal with them productively? These fears are really relevant and before us in creating change, because the more change we create, the more churn that gets created, the more we want to be all things to all people. We don't want to people. We want to make sure that we're really successful. We don't want to lose control. All these things arise. And so the question for you is, I'm just talking to you now, you, the individual watching this or listening to this. The question is, how do we deal with it? And so today, I've offered you four steps that are really important. How do you name your fears so that you no longer have to be afraid of them? They're right before you. You know what they are. Second, how do you step forward and make yourself visible and present so that you can begin to engage in a different kind of way? Third, how do you own these fears? Meaning, how do you lean into them, own them, grab hold of them, so that you can actually bring them closer to you and deal with them and not be so afraid of them? And then fourth, how do you get in motion? How do you, or another way of saying that is, how do you engage, so that you can get in motion and realize that you can do something about these. You do have some sense of agency, some ability to affect them. And you can begin to find allies and gain confidence that you can deal with them. So I hope this has been helpful today. And I hope that as your fears arise, you can begin to deal with them and conquer them and keep moving forward, because we need you as someone who's creating change in communities, in your organizations, and in your own life, so that you can be more effective and impactful in everything you do. So thanks for joining me. As you know, it's our 30th anniversary. Our work is rooted in the philosophy of civic faith. Our practice is turning outward. Our work has spread to all 50 states across the U.S. and been pulled into 40 countries. And in this country, we're trying to find more and more ways to make our work more available to you, make it more relevant to the challenges that you're facing, and for us to be more supportive of you in the change that you seek to create. Join me next week, same time, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, Facebook Live for the next Hardwood Half Hour on personal covenants. Watch for the announcement on that. We'll be sending you, you can sign up to get a personal covenant so you can work through it with me during the next Hardwood Half Hour next Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And I look forward to seeing you then. Be well. Have a great week. Thanks so much.